Hello, and welcome to South Asian Success. This podcast is focused on empowering, engaging, and connecting our community. I'm going to be talking to South Asian leaders who are putting culture at the forefront as they build companies, drive communities, lean into creativity, and build. We hope you'll enjoy the journeys that we share on this podcast, journeys of individuals who are building success on their own terms with culture at the forefront. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to South Asian Success and a very special second episode. With me today, we have Palak, Sheth, and we have Ankur Varma from Brown Man Therapy, an organization that I honestly learned about a couple of years ago living in Chicago and attending a gala that you all put on. I don't think I had heard of organizations like Brown Man Therapy to that point, and then now have followed and become really interested in a lot of the work that you all are doing. So welcome. Thank you both for joining us, and tell us a little bit about yourselves. You don't have to dive into Brown Man Therapy just yet, but tell us about you. Who are you, and what can people kind of expect to hear about a little bit from each of you?
You want to go first?
Yeah. Well, I'm my name is Ankur. I'm a therapist, and starting Brown Man Therapy was kind of something that ended up kind of on my doorstep, and with a lot of Palak's encouragement. Early in the COVID years, we were seeing a great shift in mental health, and so, especially in our South Asian community, there's been a lot of stigma or a lot of gaps in terms of mental health care. And so we found a way to platform education and dialogue storytelling around South Asian mental health and things that are relevant to a lot of men in our community. And so that's where Palak and I then started to build our organization out to address some of those gaps that we were seeing, both from my clinical side of things, what I was seeing in the therapy world, and then Palak is a organizer, community, a gatherer, and she has a lot of great ways of doing that. And so I thought that was a really great combination in terms of developing Brown Man Therapy into a bigger organization.
Oh, I love that. Wonderful.
Fun fact, Ankur and I are married, and I kind of joke that, I don't remember actually if BMT started the year that we got married or the year after, but I feel like it's like a marriage of our interests as well as our relationship and our growth. So my name is Palak. I work in tech. I work in privacy policy and tech. I kind of I hesitate to say I work in tech just because, though that is what I do now, I was in the public interest legal sector for 12 years before, which really informs a lot of the way I think about tech and how consumers consume it. And one of the things that Ankur and I spoke about is during the pandemic, he would see a lot of his South Asian friends and outside of his friends, just community members reaching out to him, and that hadn't happened before. And I think, like I said before, this marriage, one thing I noticed is on our social media platforms, there was a lot of kind of therapeutic content popping up, but frankly, massive gaps, and who the authoritative voices were in that space, and also the consumers. And, he's a mental health professional, and there are obviously a wide range of how people think about social media and mental health, but from his perspective, he hesitated to want to start a platform on social media that would reach a community. And from my perspective, when you're trying to reach a very niche audience, it's actually a platform that can be really well utilized as long as you're still putting out quality content. But also, I think the cool thing about Brown Man Therapy is, and you mentioned this, that you met us at the gala, what we quickly realized is there are things you can get done, providing resources, education, just kind of ideas on social media. This specific space really still requires in real life community spaces to bring people in, to have people meet each other, and also just feel safe that who we are as people and our reason for doing this is just to dismantle whatever kind of stigma there was around mental health in the South Asian community, and to target, I think, a particular part of our community that frankly isn't the ones that we're always focused on when we think about who's struggling with their mental.
Yeah, no, and you all are making me think of, oh gosh, I listened to a podcast, and it wasn't actually South Asian focused, but it was focused on boys because I happen to be a mom of 2 boys, and there is a bit of a concern, right, for boys today that that they're being left behind. There's this kind of statement, right, being made, and it is because of lack of mentorship and lack of strong kind of older sort of role models and things like that interestingly, I think with our South Asian culture, and you all obviously are very much closer to this, there's people kind of in all different scenarios and situations, right? People that came to the US and their families are in India, or there's people that are, the first generation doing something really, really big in their career or something like that, and have a lot of they're bearing a lot of weight on their shoulders. So I'm curious if obviously you identified some of the gaps, but could you dive in a little bit more on the gaps? What made you create this organization? What were some of the things you saw playing out? How are you sort of working to address that?
Yeah, I think the first, I would say like 8 to 10 years of my career, I did a lot of community work, different cultural backgrounds, and I really never got to work with men in the way that I do now. And, I worked in different cultural communities, and the common thread was always that I would get families in, and usually that included women and children, teenagers, but rarely did I get a father in or a partner, male partner in, unless it was almost like a mandatory or necessary moment in their life. And so I started to notice this, and even though I didn't work in the South Asian community specifically, I started to notice this trend across different cultures around men and their resistance to therapy, and or not feeling that they knew exactly how to use it. And so there was always a lot of education around the male clients that I worked with. But then when we got into the late 2010s into the early 20s, I started to get a lot of more men from my own cultural community, South Asian community, but just also my age group in the 30s, 40s, those reaching kind of that midlife period. And a lot of questions around, hey, should I go to therapy? Or maybe people who were in therapy, but just not getting out of it what they wanted or needed. And so I started to notice this trend across cultures. And then when I started to shift my focus to the South Asian culture and my own friends and family who were asking these questions, I started to notice a lot of this, like you mentioned, weight that had been stacked for years. And, sometimes if you slowly stack the weight, you don't notice that it's heavy. And then when you bring your attention to it, or when that last little piece is put on top, that kind of takes you over, then you really notice, right? And so a lot of folks were finding themselves in crisis, because they hadn't been addressing some of these things for a long time. And so that was like expectation, cultural expectation, gender expectation, roles that they were supposed to play. And then also just this expectation that there's nowhere that you're supposed to release this. You're supposed to just hold it in or push it down, and kind of, the very typical masculine expectations that again shift across cultures. But in the South Asian culture specifically, there wasn't really a lot of space, and there wasn't really a lot of knowledge in terms of how to share, how to talk about certain experiences, certain, perceived failures, certain emotions. And so that's really why we started it, was let me just get education out there. Let me get what I know from my personal and professional experiences. And then really, I love the way that Palak came in and really encouraged, she said earlier, I was not prone to do this on social media. That's still a challenge for me, but it's a very necessary platform and a really helpful platform to get to the masses, which I also saw as a gap in mental health, which is that we're working a lot of times with one-on-one situations. And so making widespread change across communities is really challenging sometimes in the traditional therapy model.
Yeah, and I think I would just add that, like, and this is also something I've done elsewhere, and I wear a lot of hats, and I think the utility that I bring to Brahmin therapy is frankly identifying gaps, but also thinking about ways that we can build the spaces that create like comfortable environments. So for example, I also have a social political women's group that I started back in 2017. And the idea was not to get, a group of people that were all a group of women that were already politically active to do more. My thought process was, man, there's a massive gap among my friends, those that are hyper into politics and those that like are too busy and career focused or family focused. And by the way, all of these policies and politics impact them and they have great ideas, but they don't consider themselves political. And so I was like, let's create the forum for how they can, one, educate themselves on issues that they don't know about so they feel the confidence to go out there and speak about it. And two, share their own knowledge, their own space, whether that's public health, mental health, whatever it is, education, and be kind of authority figures in a room full of other women looking to learn. And the idea was that we would meet consistently, build a community, and through those two things, it's kind of like, that's my recipe for making change. It's like build a community, keep it consistent with the programming, and like that is how you start to shift the needle. And that I use that example because I think it's effective. I think that organization has been really effective, post Smart Salon, and I thought that that recipe could be used here. It's like, where do men go socially, you know, to kind of have, first of all, any social interaction and conversation, let alone like the tough convos that I think actually women tend to do in like various environments, like with our girls or with other people. And what we realized, and Uncle and I were joking, we're like, even when guys do make the take the initiative to like reach out to another friend to go hang out, it's largely centered around sporting events or professional events or, you know, the bar or something like that. And not that those are not great places to hang, but I think there's just not a lot of intention to like, what if you're really struggling? Like, where do you go? And so that was the idea here, was like, yes, we're going to put out information, we're going to have people see, I think, like a face in an occupation that they don't really see a lot of, which is a brown man therapist, and put that content out there, but then also follow up by creating kind of more intimate settings where you can have conversations, as well as, you know, we'll talk about the Diwali Gala later, but kind of really big events where you're going for like the fun of it, but then you leave with like hopefully your mind kind of expanded to issues that you maybe not, don't focus on or don't think about often.
Yeah. Well, at first, I mean, there's so much to unpack, but I'm glad. One thing I'm glad I heard is that people came to you, because I think that's the first thing that is so challenging in our South Asian spaces in general. I mean, like, let's just take gender out of it. It still is, you know, challenging to talk about mental health, right? And I think we're seeing generations are getting better and it is improving, and thank goodness, right? But that is awesome to hear that people came and that you caught this trend, but it was because you were actually hearing from folks. I'm very proud of those people, whoever they were, right? Because they took that first step and they're helping you create
I
programming
would argue,
for so
like,
many.
they didn't just come, they also provided ideas. Like,
Yeah,
they would come and
right.
be like, hey, you know, I'm actually dealing with grief. I would love to talk about that. And like helped us create the conversations that I think there were, we noticed there were gaps.
The important conversations, right? No, that's really great. I mean, that not great conversations, unfortunately. Half the time they are challenging conversations, but taking those first steps is, you know, how these things can actually become important topics that we talk about and we don't just store. One of the topics that we talked about together is burnout. We know this is a systemic issue. Unfortunately, many people in many spaces are overextended emotionally, physically, mentally. Burnout is a conversation. I literally like just did a podcast episode on triggers and leadership, you know, burnout. But one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting that we chatted about is that you're starting to see this in younger folks too, right? Like, I think we attribute it to an older problem, a problem, you know, of leadership, or a problem when you have a lot of life burdens, but you're starting to see this at a younger age. And not that this conversation is going to be about burnout, because I think we want to flip the script a little bit and talk about what you can do. But can you just talk briefly to that, what you are seeing and how you kind of are seeing that play out in the workplace today?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's an important topic to fully understand kind of the full breadth of what burnout means, or what it really is. I think burnout is like the end result of a long process. And even, you know, going back to what we were just talking about, I remember the first night that I had a class in grad school, and my first thought after that class was, I should have learned this years ago. I should have learned these tools. I should have learned this information years ago in my high school education, right? Not to have to pay for a grad school education to get basic skills around communication, understanding my feelings, how to communicate across cultures. That was my first class. And the reason I bring that up is because I think a lot of times we end up in a place of burnout or fatigue because we don't have the tools and the support system along the way. And now we've reached a point where we are desperate, right? We are can't get ourselves to go to work. We can't get ourselves to do our basic functions, whatever that might be, or maybe that's the bare minimum that we're able to do. And so what do we have to do is now we have to re-educate ourselves and learn new tools, learn new strategies, learn new boundaries around certain things. I think burnout is happening for a lot of people in terms of consuming information in a lot of different ways. And so they're overwhelmed, right? And they feel like they can't actually make a change or have control over that change. And I think that is pretty those things are pretty common to what we might call burnout. But I think, you know, and this is probably for people who are much better experts on burnout overall, to talk about the different phases that lead up to what is a result, which is burnout. And I've had that conversation with folks as well in terms of calling it a fatigue process. Compassion fatigue is one term here as well. But I think that is something that I'm noticing. You know, it's something that I have learned for myself to incorporate and implement tools and supports to help avoid that process and get out ahead of it. And I think that's what I'm seeing, you know, in therapy a lot of times is I've reached and it's kind of parallel to burnout, where I've reached a point where I don't know where else to turn. So I'm finally starting therapy, right? And, you know, I would love for it. And I think our mission here is, you know, to get this stuff out ahead. And that's why it takes me back to that first grad school class where I'm like, we should have learned this a long time ago, but the next best time is now, to learn this stuff and try to implement it. And so that's a really big, you know, part of our mission here.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it makes me also just think, you know, why aren't we learning that? Why aren't we teaching that? When do we start? Do we start now? Elementary school? I don't know. Like there should be, you know, this feels too late already in some ways. But no, that's important. And we started chatting in our kind of pre-call, which was about some of the tools that people are finding supporting them to support them, right? And one of them being creativity and the role that, or maybe you know, having a hobby, having something that you like to do that is providing you some sort of fulfillment or the ability to utilize your brain or utilize your passion in a new way. I know that you, Ankur, had an example of maybe somebody that you'd spoken to that said they leaned into some sort of a creative outlet. And I would just love to hear, what are you hearing? And Palak, we're going to talk about creativity because I know you've seen this play out in your own life, but just kind of curious, are you seeing people leaning into, you know, I don't even want to call it, like, I don't want to call it a hobby because I feel like it's just too simplistic to call it a hobby, right? But it could be just that, right? Finding something that gives you fulfillment outside of maybe the noise, right? To allow you to find purpose, to find value. So where are you seeing that play out in what kinds of ways?
Well, you know, I think I will look at Bullock as a great example of finding outlets and new ways of, you know, addressing things that she feels is important. I think what I'm finding a lot is in therapy is people that are looking for something that's fulfilling. And a lot of times that is a return to creativity, because what have we been told, you know, as teenagers and young adults, is that we need to get serious and put in the work and check off all the boxes, right? You know, and if you check off the boxes and you put in the work and you make sacrifice, then you will be successful. And a lot of times that successful term is financial, and very rarely is it soul success, right? Feeling that on an existential level. And I think that's where I think we're starting to see this in a lot of different ways. I know that I see that with clients in terms of them finding what might start as a hobby, but really it's like what was that passion that I gave up that I, you know, might have answered as like a fifth grader. I would have said, oh, I want to be this. But then I was told that that's not a viable career. And so I had to put that to the side. And so I do see that as kind of a return and a way to address things like burnout, where people are tapping back into their creative juices to, whether it's create in terms of a business entrepreneur. I think we're seeing this boom in entrepreneurship that I think is maybe a direct or indirect result of people returning to passion, returning to those deeper levels of fulfillment.
Yeah. Hi. I wanted to be a writer. I said that when I was a kid. There was no college path for me to do that. It was like biology, engineering,
Yeah.
you know, that was
Is that
pretty
your
much it.
background, by the way, engineering?
My background is biology and engineering, so, and business. I just did
Unbelievable. I
all
know
the
you
things.
for like all these other reasons, and I would have never guessed that, but that is the beauty of it, you know? And by the way, that just speaks to like investment. You know, people kind of wonder why like I would be so invested in brown man therapy and like have all these ideas for it. And frankly, it's because of all of the South Asian men in my own life who I recognize have been kind of trained to think in a certain way. And I think that like it has not led them to feeling like the kind of purpose at the end of that, you know, at the end of that path that they thought they needed to take. So as Ankur just mentioned, I think it's like almost an unlearning where we keep telling, not just men, by the way, women too, but I think it's predominantly in our culture, it has historically been men, where there's all of this pressure to succeed, whatever success looks like, but all of this pressure to like be ambitious and succeed. And frankly, in my experience, I know all of these very high achieving South Asian men that meet those expectations only to realize that A, it's not going to fulfill them, regardless of burnout. Let's say they don't. Like burnout, like you guys just discussed, is very real, and there's all of these kinds of tools that we probably need to learn to deal with that. But even if you wouldn't identify with the words burnout, and you just kind of got to the end of it and realized like, okay, I've kind of ticked off all the things I was told to do, but I'm not feeling joy or purpose, or frankly, sometimes sadly, like they've potentially underinvested in not just passions, but people, in the relationships that will make you feel good at the end of, that road. And so when I think about Brahman therapy, I think about those people in my life, and I'm like, you did everything that you thought you needed to do, but you weren't told you also need to invest in like your physical health, your mental health, your community, and your relationships. And I think that, again, by both educating people plus creating those spaces, we're hoping to kind of like unlearn and retrain in a different way.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I think many of us can, of seeing that, in life, in many stages of life. And, unfortunately, it plays a little bit into the gender norms too. Okay, let's talk about this. For those that are saying, I don't know what I would do, I don't know what my hobby might be, or what good is this going to do me, right? And Palak, you had some really great examples of your own life, your own creative outlets, and how even brown man therapy technically is a side gig, as I like to call it, right? You have your day job, how your alternative outlets actually play into your work life and maybe make you better, more passionate, able to do things better. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think if somebody's sitting there going like, what's the point? There can be more of a point, right?
Yeah. And I don't even know that I've thought about this on the front end, but on reflection, like I often get man, I don't get how you do it all. Like, where's the time? And people often question, like, where's the time? I mean, and I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so busy, like doing highbrow stuff. I also watch like a good amount of TV. Like I really do a lot of random things. And the point is, I think like, first of all, creativity begets creativity. And investing in these things, whether it's a 1 hour dance class or it's a 4 hours a week on how we're gonna like on idea generation and execution for brown man therapy, it makes me better at my day job. It allows me to connect also with different people that I don't connect with through my job, that is good for my job, for me to have those perspectives. But I believe that like the creativity, one, if you have a skill or a talent at all and you're not able to make that your job, because I'm a practical person and I just would not do some things like full time. If you can somehow maintain that skill or talent in your adulthood, it will, one, I think, just give you a confidence that is sometimes hard to get in your job or in your relationships. You're not getting confidence from everywhere as you kind of deal with imposter syndrome and other things, or having a family and whatnot. But if you have a skill or a talent that like makes you, whether it's writing or singing or dancing for me, and you invest a little bit in it, I actually think you get an outsized return, because it gives you a confidence that you then can carry through on other things. That's how I at least think about it. And also the creative energy that I expend in, I mean, ask Ankur, probably annoyingly, I have ideas all the time for brown man therapy, business days. And frankly, when I am not working on a side gig, like on something, I am also not creative in anything else. Like those ideas kind of like go away. They're just not happening when I'm not working on one of these things. So the busier I am, busier like by somebody outside looking at my life, the busier I am, the more at ease I am in doing each of these things. It actually kind of like, I don't know, it just kind of like flows over to the other stuff. Not a great, no.
I can relate to this. I mean, I definitely can relate to this, that sometimes when I feel like I have like an idle day, which is not that often, but you have a day where it's a little unstructured and you're like, now what? Like you kind of, sometimes it's the least productive of days, the days without.
Which is probably also, I'm sure Ankur would say like, that's also very good for us. People that like to keep themselves busy.
Take a day off.
But totally. And I think the other thing is like, we just became parents, and it's one more thing, obviously, and it takes up a lot of both time but mental space. And I think after becoming a parent, I decided I also wanted to go back and teach dance, on the side, not a lot, just 1 hour a week. And again, I get the same question, like, how do you have time? But again, I actually think having our daughter has gotten me like re-energized to keep dance in my life in some way.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I, again, like very similar story with writing for me. I used to write when I was young. I stopped. And when I had kids is when I picked it back up because I started saying I want to tell stories that I want my kids to be able to understand. Yes, I can fully relate. And, I think it's interesting because people will say, where do you find the time? And before I had children, I'll tell you, I probably sat and watched a lot more TV than I do now. But you use your time differently, right? You choose to use your time differently. I always say, like with parents, and this is, not a plug for anyone, don't become a parent if you don't want to. But if you do become a parent, I think you kind of take on this like really high level of productivity in the tiniest slots of the day, right? Like 15 minutes.
Honestly,
Yeah.
because parents, like especially moms, are really good at time management. And actually, just to make sure I answer, like going back to your question, like if people ask what's the benefit, I also think, and this is, I love meeting people through this type of work. So, like, we have cool conversations with other creatives, with other entrepreneurs that I would not have met having recently moved to Chicago. Previously, I was in San Francisco. Same thing there. Like, it's through organizing that I met other organizers. And I was like, oh my God, like, you are a mover, you're a shaker. And I'm inspired by the way you think about the things you do. And I just think that you can pay to go to conferences or you can kind of like dip your hand into something and like meet all these cool people through it. Or you can do both.
Yeah, and I would just add here, I think just to reinforce the benefit of this, first of all, creativity can be whatever you want it to be. But I think we live in this world where we're very outcomes oriented. And, I work with a lot of people from immigrant families and backgrounds. And there is this really common theme that everything I do has to be productive. And so, if you feel like you have to be productive, yes, you can be productive. You can take your passion and make it into a business or something that has output, but it can also just be, Palak, you use this word flow. You use it a little bit differently, but I think that's when I see you in these states, when I see you dancing or doing it like embroidery, you're in flow state. And I think that is good for your mental health. Like, there is no just one way to work on your mental health. It is sometimes tapping into your creative thinking, which then builds your critical thinking. And those are the things that you need to be mentally healthy and mentally strong. And so I think there's a lot of pushback sometimes from people who are like, I don't have time, to do this fun thing, creative thing. It doesn't have to make you money. It doesn't have to be, if you start writing, you don't have to be published. If you want to be, if that was a goal, great, go pursue it. But, just developing these different skills is good for your brain. And, if you're able to meet people through that, I think one of the big privileges and honors of my work is I get to hear people's stories and I get to hear how people think and how they create. And it always helps me to then be like, oh, I need to implement this other perspective on things. And so I think in a lot of different ways, tapping into that creativity and then finding community around that creativity is actually going to be only good for you. And then, finding those limits and boundaries also important. But I think that's something that we've learned, you know, is that we build so much of our creativity off of what other people are thinking, saying, desiring in their own lives, and we try to address that as directly as possible.
Let's talk about community because you do have different avenues to connect with people. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I first got introduced to Brown Man Therapy with coming to the gala that I came to a couple of years ago. And I remember I didn't know what to expect. I was like, a gala for mental health. Like, it's like, yes, you go to fundraisers where you're going to donate some money maybe to a cause. This was different, and we actually like raised our hands. I remember you asked some tough questions of the audience, and we raised our hands of, are you going through challenging things in your life, right? And I can't I remember a specific question. We won't get into it right now, but I think that's a really interesting method, and I would love to just dive into the gala, the approach, right? What was the idea behind it, and how do you sort of balance, right, this fun atmosphere with purpose? Because I think that's you did it really well, but it's a tough one to do well, I think.
Well, I'll jump in really quickly, and I'm gonna give it to Palak because the idea started with like us. We were on the, if you're listening to this in Chicago or from Chicago, we were on the River Walk having a walk, And all I said was, I want to do something with Diwali and mental health. The themes align really closely, and then Palak being the event, and creative thinker, big thinker that she is, really ran with that. So I'll let her kind of talk more about the gala itself and what the evolution of that was.
I almost forgot that. So let me just paint the picture for the audience a little bit, because yes, it was, we've done 3 galas so far, and I feel like on social media, there was a lot of kind of like Diwali events happening on the coasts. And again, I was kind of new here and I didn't know what Chicago was doing in a larger scale. So I had an interest to do something around Diwali anyways. That was one thing. Ankur had this idea. And then my other thing was, between myself and Ankur, frankly speaking, when I think about therapy, I actually probably don't think about like capital T therapy. I think about like, what are the things that benefit my mental health? And I know that I'm probably among the more kind of like, not reluctant, I don't want to use that word, I believe in therapy, but I'm not always the first one to want to initiate it or even suggest it to a friend. And so I wanted to make sure that we hosted an event a year that was kind of like a larger event that grabbed more people than would come to a specific mental health event, and capture those people, because frankly, they're often the ones that need to hear this stuff, but either don't look for it, don't resonate with it, or are just scared. So I was like, okay, let's throw a party that people want to come to. And we started to coin it as a party with a purpose. And I remember the moment we realized that like Diwali is actually the perfect South Asian holiday to kind of use, because while we often talk about light overcoming darkness through, things like prosperity and your physical health, Ankur and I were talking about, well, what about finding the light through the darkness? And that's our theme for our Diwali Gala, is finding light through darkness. And the goal is we're going to hook you it's going to be at a great venue with a good DJ, and you get to dress up. And then you're going to attend knowing that there's probably some program, not fully realizing that there's also going to be some interactive part of the program where you're going to participate and actually have to get vulnerable. And so and I actually remember, as an event planner type person who's done events, large scale events my whole life, when Ankur the very first year told me that he was going to do not a simulation, but like an interactive kind of session where he asks everybody in the room to close their eyes. And I'm like, okay, we're at a restaurant in downtown Chicago. Everybody's wearing their lehengas, totally dressed up. We're cutting the music to like have you talk. And then you're going to be like, all right, everybody, close your eyes and imagine, that person that has made you, like, that you're super thankful for, you have a lot of gratitude for. And I'm like, are people going to get into it? It's going to be weird. It's going to mess up with the flow. I was like a naysayer. I was like, I don't know. Maybe we move it to the end. Maybe you don't make it interactive. You do it with the MC. So like people can watch, but they don't need to interact. And I kid you not, people were pin drop silent. We had a photographer. The photographer like took a picture. Everybody's eyes were closed. He then asked everybody to like pull out their phones and they don't need to send it, but like draft a message to that person that they had thought about. I'm almost like choking up because people did. And I feel like, and whether they sent it or not, that exercise, people came up to me, men who I'd never met before came up to me afterwards and were like raving about it. And they just did not know that an event that, again, they in their minds were like, it's a Diwali party. They did not know that there was going to be something that forced them to kind of really like go deep and go in. I've kind of lost the whole idea of what you asked, but the point is that was success for us. We wanted to have a party with a purpose, and we wanted it to do it at cool spaces. Like we sold out every year. We moved it to another venue in Chicago, and we've sold out for the last 2 years in that venue. And I think we're kind of starting to think, like, do we need to get bigger? We've shifted it a little bit in that one thing I think we realized that first year is our organization and this event isn't just for the average South Asian person. It's also for the South Asian mental health professionals. And I think that there are just not enough spaces where they get to not just gather, but really be uplifted and almost put a spotlight on them. I think I tell Ankur this all the time. I'm a lawyer by training. I feel like we give ourselves awards all the time. But in their profession, they're often seen as like behind the curtain. They're like not really allowed to kind of, historically. And so one thing that we've been doing the last 2 years is really giving out awards to both the mental health champion. So someone that has really been like they're clinical and they are a professional in this space, and they've been doing it and targeting our community for a lot longer than it's been on trend. And then also a mental health storyteller. So really, like, even if you're not a professional, but you have made your story, your journey, and you've been vulnerable and you've shared that, That I think is the number one thing that I've seen help people, give people permission to do the same. And that's where really like the shift happens. So yeah, we're going into our fourth year of the gala. I think now, I feel like it's now a staple of the Chicago kind of events that happen around that time of the year. And I'm looking, and I think with these awards too, I get a lot of joy out of like the discovery and like the nomination and the idea of like uplifting these people, because going back to what I said earlier, when you do this work, you tend to meet people that are also doing cool things. And one of the biggest benefits of Brown therapy is we have met other organizations popping up around the country, in Philly, in LA, in New York, that are doing similar things, sometimes like overlapping and sometimes in different swim lanes. And I just want to make sure that like we are drawing awareness to those guys and those organizations and the individuals doing the work.
I think I met people from DC at the yeah.
Yep.
So I remember that. No, I think you did answer the question, because the question really it was a about how do you mirror, purpose and a fun atmosphere that people actually come to, right? Like you're selling out, it's not just your patients that are coming, right? So you're actually drawing a crowd. But I will say, I do remember, I think the interaction was very memorable, because you go to a million galas and you sit as a guest and you don't interact in that way. You interact with your table, you interact with people around you, and I think that makes it stand out. Like it is something that you are going to, there's a moment that you might have, it gets a little real, like, yes, you're in your linga and you might have tears, because it just could be something that you haven't thought about. But I think that's a very powerful thing. And, I think you guys do it really well. And it
I'll
is
just
a
add
fun
one.
time too.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say one more, or maybe two more things. One, we're super intentional about the words we use. Ankur very early on said, I do not want to talk about this in a gloomy and doomy way. I want it to be specifically a celebration of mental health. Use that word. It did not click for me until I realized like that is what we're doing. We celebrate people when they are on their physical health journey and they've made progress. We should also talk about mental health in that same way. And so I think oftentimes mental health has this cloud around it that it must be hard and dark and challenging, but there is an opportunity for us to celebrate the wins, and this was kind of that. That's one, so we're super intentional about that. And then two, people also ask all the time, like, so how do you know that you are making an impact or you're moving the needle? And I think, while society loves metrics and I love metrics, I think like it's the anecdotal stories, like text messages and email addresses from friends of friends that are like, hey, I've actually been on like anxiety medicine for years. None of my friends knew that. And I told them right afterwards. And like that was just a thing that I was like, that's coming from South Asian men that probably never talked to their spouses about this, people in their life. And now they're feeling like it's okay to. It's actually not. There's no stigma around it.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And Ankur, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, I think the parallel here that, Palak mentioned earlier is that not just are people now talking more about mental health, but there are more organizations and more like there's more structure around addressing these gaps and these issues. And I think that's something too that is motivating for us, is to see that people are doing this work. And I think that's the message that I want people to hear as well, is that there are other people doing the work. And so once you get started, once that like Palak was mentioning, these kind of anecdotal things that we hear every year after so much, like the gala for sure, but even our smaller events where people then stay afterwards and talk and share and open up with people who were strangers just an hour or two before that. I think that's that's kind of the destigmatization here that has been really necessary, is that, okay, I'm doing this alone, or I'm the only one experiencing, when in fact we're all kind of going through some things here, or we could be. And so there is support when we are able to tap into our vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think this is a great place to leave it, because we're talking about mental health, but we're talking about, let's celebrate mental health, right? Let's celebrate the journey. Let's celebrate the people that are brave enough to come and be the first to actually put their name out there that they need help, because they have started this change, right? They've started a lot of the work that you're doing. And then let's celebrate everybody that's on this journey, because it's not easy. It's never going to be easy to put your hand up, right? And I think even for many of us, even as we talk about it today, I look back on that gala and the questions that you asked in that gala, and I was like, oh my gosh, it made me still a little bit uncomfortable but not in a bad way, right? Uncomfortable because I just don't, there's things you don't talk about. There's
I
things
want
that
to
Really?
I
you
want to
don't.
know what that question was
Well, I think what
offline.
it was, and I'll tell you honestly, and I don't talk about this, so I'm going to tell you guys. So I think it was around like chronic pain or something like that. It was like, it was eyes closed. Like, do you have something related to like chronic pain issues or something? Anyways, I don't remember the exact question, but I do. And I've had for the last like 5 years fibromyalgia issues. It's just not something I talk about, you know? But
Yeah.
it was like a huge weight on me for probably 2 years of my life. Now it's like I cope with it, I deal with it, I go to the doctor every month, you know, but I don't talk about it, honestly.
Yeah.
So I do remember that because it was like I was with my sister and like I don't know, it was just like it was a
Yeah.
fun night out and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're getting, you know, we're going into it." So, but that's okay, you know, because truly like going through those things in your life. I talk about it with my family and I, you know, they're very well aware, but like going through those things in your life, you sometimes feel like you're alone, right? And in that space, you are not alone. And that's super cool. That's something that is not easy to achieve.
And at some point, I think across one of the questions, everyone likely rose their hand because everyone is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
overcoming something.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the journey. So yeah, thank you for sharing, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, this was amazing. Thank you all for chatting about this. I think we went literally where I hoped we would go, but even more, even deeper and into a better place. And hopefully we're able to inspire people, whether or not you choose to, you know, take a path of mental health awareness or learning. Maybe it's even just dabbling into your own creative outlets to help you to achieve something better, right? Whatever it is, one step better. And hopefully we can inspire people. And yes, I love celebrating all the mental health heroes out there. So we're celebrating everyone across the country, not just here in Chicago, but this is wonderful to hear you guys be able to spread this message. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to do it on social media. We know it's not easy, but it is a tool for good when
For
it,
good. Use it for good.
yes, exactly. But yeah, thank you both for the time. And I'm really looking forward to the next gala coming up in 2026.
Oh my God, the planning needs to start. A reminder. Thank you so much for giving us this space.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara.
All right, take care. And thank you everyone for joining us. And hopefully you will join us again for the next episode of South Asian Success. Thank you for listening to South Asian Success. If this episode resonated with you, we hope that you'll share it with a friend or someone else who could resonate with it as well. And if you love what we're doing and building, please do rate us on whatever podcast method you stream on. Any reviews will help us grow and improve this platform. And if you are interested in joining us or talking more about your journey, please be sure to reach out. Take care.